Do you think sumo is just a show where fat guys crash into each other? If so, that image ends today. There are many martial arts around the world, but sumo is often called the fastest martial art in the world when it comes to deciding a winner. From the initial charge, it takes only a few seconds. Men weighing over 150 kilograms explode into action the moment the signal is given. Beneath the layer of fat lies massive, dense muscle. In an instant, they reach maximum output, blinding speed, devastating power, and refined technique. The match is over in the blink of an eye, but sumo is not just a power fight. It is the oldest martial art in Japan. A ritual offered to the gods, a prayer for abundant harvests, and a sacred battle meant to stomp down evil spirits believed to dwell in the earth. The ring is a sacred space. Every handful of salt thrown has meaning, and even a single stomp carries the power to subdue spirits. Its form has remained largely unchanged since the Edo period. For many foreigners, sumo is seen as an exotic traditional entertainment. However, there is no other combat sport that demands you unleash every ounce of your strength in a single instant, quite like sumo. Today, our combat sports team has carefully selected matches that best showcase just how incredible sumo truly is. Let's take a look at the fastest battles. A showdown between Musoyama, who triumphed in that legendary striking battle, and Mainumi, one of the smallest competitors in professional sumo. A match between Mainumi and Akebono, the first foreign-born yokozuna in sumo history, the sport's highest rank. After retiring from sumo, Akebono transitioned into kickboxing and MMA, where he faced fighters such as Royce Gracie and Remy Bonjasky. Their opponent was a grand yokozuna who reigned with overwhelming dominance. His opponent is Musashimaru, a fellow Hawaiian and countryman of Akebono, who would later become the second foreign-born yokozuna in history, following Akebono. Like Mainumi, Kyokudozan was also a small-built rikishi, but he continued to rack up victories without fear, even against much larger opponents. A bout between the chiseled, powerfully built Chiyonofuji and Hawaii-born Konishiki.
前ミスを引いて初めて組み止めました千代の富士。もろ差し。動きが止まってのこの下手ひねり。上川さん、これが横綱の相撲だという貫禄を見せましたね。
あっち行ったれってような感じでしたね。
This legendary Yokozuna defeated his opponent head-on in both matches, even with an overwhelming size disadvantage, without relying on any tricks.
食いついた横綱千代の富士。千代の富士寄ります。下手投げ、投げ飛ばしました千代の富士。
In this bout, a lower-ranked Ozeki defeated a dominant Yokozuna who came from Mongolian wrestling. Throwing Zabuton cushions is, of course, prohibited, but even the rule-abiding Japanese fans were swept up in the excitement. You can feel the intense atmosphere of that moment. How was it? About 7 minutes have passed since you started watching this video, and by this point, you have already seen 12 matches. From this alone, you may have realized just how quickly bouts in sumo can be decided. However, on the other hand, there are often whispers among combat sports fans that sumo is a traditional performance rather than a real fighting sport. One reason often cited for this criticism is that wrestlers from sumo have not always achieved notable results when they have tried their hand at other combat sports, such as MMA or kickboxing. A frequently mentioned example is Akebono, the Hawaii-born wrestler introduced earlier in the video, who became the first foreign-born Yokozuna. The bout against Bob Sapp, a former NFL player who had transitioned into MMA, drew enormous attention, so much so that it recorded one of the highest television ratings among combat sports programs in recent years. There had been fighters before who moved from sumo into other combat sports. However, this time it was the MMA debut of a former Yokozuna, the highest rank in sumo. Public interest reached an unprecedented level. In sumo, the champion rank is technically Ozeki, but Yokozuna, which stands above it, is regarded as something beyond a champion, almost a figure in a divine realm. Even elderly viewers who normally had little interest in combat sports tuned in, making it a breathtakingly huge match watched across Japan. But the result was merciless. Akebono went 0-4 in MMA, and in kickboxing he fought 10 bouts and won only once, eventually retiring from combat sports. Because of these results, some people began to form the impression that sumo equals weak. However, if we look back at the long history of sumo, cross-style fights are not something that began recently. Toward the end of the samurai era, in the late Edo period, there are already records of sumo wrestlers competing against boxers and wrestlers, and in some cases achieving respectable results. So why couldn't Akebono succeed? There are many possible factors. But personally, I feel that the biggest reason is that Akebono was a wrestler highly specialized for the rules of sumo. In kickboxing and MMA, his body was simply too large, making it difficult to adjust his stamina for the much longer and more demanding fights required outside of sumo. I sometimes wonder whether the results might have been different if wrestlers such as Mainumi, Kyokudozan, or even Yokozuna like Chiyonofuji or Takanohana had attempted cross-style competition during the peak of their careers and trained specifically for those sports. Another factor is economics. With rare exceptions such as the boxing world champion Naoya Inoue, sumo is one of the highest-paying combat sports in Japan. Once a wrestler rises to a decent rank, there is very little incentive to risk moving into another sport. Moreover, most wrestlers retire because years of intense training eventually lead to injuries or declining performance. In other words, by the time they attempt cross-style competition, many are already past their athletic prime. There is also the issue of matchmaking. Because former sumo wrestlers are well known, they are often matched against famous or accomplished fighters right from their debut. They rarely get the chance to build experience gradually by accumulating wins, which is normally essential for developing fighters. And even within sumo itself, wrestlers are not all the same. Some specialize in powerful striking like harite, open-handed slaps. Others rely on speed and technique, while some are well-rounded competitors with balanced abilities. Personally, while there may be weaknesses in areas like stamina or submission grappling, I find it hard to believe that men who weigh 150 kilograms, trading open-handed strikes with no guard, taking headbutts to the face, and throwing and slamming enormous opponents to the ground could truly be considered weak. If I fought them, it would probably look something like this. Perhaps one of the sumo wrestlers who achieved relatively solid results after transitioning to MMA was Sentoryu. One of his opponents was the silver medalist in the 95 kg judo division at the Atlanta Olympics. Another opponent was a top-level fighter from Kyokushin Karate. Even in the matches he lost, many were very close contests. He was the kind of fighter who makes you wonder what might have happened if he had transitioned while still in his sumo prime. Sumo can be considered one of the martial arts where the fastest and most violent collisions in the world take place. Of course, the wrestlers themselves probably have little interest in competing in other combat sports. But still, it's hard not to wonder what might have happened if Ozeki or Yokozuna-level wrestlers at the peak of their careers had tuned their training for other fighting disciplines. If this video has changed the way you look at sumo even a little, I'd be very happy. And with that, I'll see you in the next video.
Japan B is a channel that randomly shares information about lesser-known aspects of Japanese culture, spanning across various genres.